welcome to our Graduate School of Business Research Seminar, which we're having today with Peter Verhezen, who is joining us from Antwerp, professor of Antwerp University and Antwerp School of Management. One of the most brilliant speakers on the topics of corporate governance, artificial intelligence, and everything that, can you hear me? Sound is off. That's what, no, you can hear me. Okay, wonderful. Because I see in the chat that there was some issues with the sound. I hope now all technical issues are solved. So why Peter? Wonderful. So Peter is not only a management scholar, but he's an entrepreneur. He's a consultant with IFC within the World Bank Group. He has extensive experience in the academic world, being a professor, teaching courses on corporate governance, responsible management, ethics in business, sustainability. His areas of expertise include not only corporate governance, but artificial intelligence, decision-making, which should be wise, strategy and sustainable investment, digital innovation, and artificial intelligence in the firms. And today, since we already wasted 5 minutes of your time, I suggest we skip with the long introduction and go straight to the PowerPoint presentation that Peter wanted to show with you. And the way we want to engage today is we will have Peter speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we have the same amount of time for your questions. So please feel free to ask them in the chat box while Peter is speaking, and then we will have the opportunity for you to engage with Peter. So let me share with you. Peter, the floor is yours. And tell me if you need any help with scrolling the slides.
Sure. You all hear me? You hear me, Ekaterina?
I do.
Yes, you can hear me, right?
Yes. That's what we see in the chat box.
Okay. Wonderful. So you make me a little bit blushing, Ekaterina, because when people say I'm an expert about everything, then I'm saying, my gosh, you must be a Superman, and I'm not Superman. Let me just briefly say this, that yes, of the 35 years of working, half of that was as an entrepreneur in Southeast Asia and Australia, where I was involved with an ICT company after I was with IBM for a short while as a consultant. I ran a business for 17 years. And the other 17 years was half-time as an academic at Melbourne and in Antwerp, and half-time focusing on governance. And so it's these two together, the governance interest, which means for me, steering organizations away from risks and to opportunities on one hand, and the IT interest that I always had, although I'm not an IT person, is then what made me thinking the last year or two about how to improve decisions. How can boards, particularly, and organizations make better decisions? And that led me then into dwelling in a little bit into neuroscience and understanding how our brains are constituted and how they are so different and similar in a way, which is a paradox, as to what artificial intelligence is trying to achieve these days. And so the topic of today is indeed inside the wise leader's brain. And the idea is to have a better understanding how we people in general, and particularly, of course, executives, how we learn, how we make decisions, and how it is that different and similar to how algorithms and artificial intelligence, deep machine learning, is evolving over the last couple of years. And obviously, the ultimate objective is to think in a more holistic manner, which implies that we have a broader perspective, which hopefully will make us smart, but even more important, a wise decision maker. That is basically the reason why I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts. So if you look at it, leadership is really about decision making and hopefully making the right decisions. Why? Simple. The future is uncertain. We have no clue what's going to happen. And if you're looking into neuroscience and the way our brains work, it is quite amazing how we have evolved and how we indeed are able to make smart and wise decisions. We can even argue that our brain, to a certain part, is a kind of natural algorithm, which, of course, artificial intelligence and scientists have tried to mimic. And so the idea is, okay, if leadership is so crucial for the challenges we are addressing today, and they're huge, and I'm not talking only about the pandemic that we're all facing right now, I'm talking about a lot of issues that are beyond an individual organization. And so how will businesses be part of a solution and not just be the problem, as they are often today? That is the interest that triggered me to think about this from a neuroscientific perspective. And so this slide shows you a little bit how scientists over the last 15 years and with success over the last 10 years have mimicked the way our brain is functioning. And so you see there a visual, literally the neurons that we have in our brain are somehow copied by that perception that has been long time ago been described as a perceptron, is now able somehow to mimic. And that's something I want to explain how we are making decisions. This visual here, you see clearly that artificial intelligence doesn't understand anything we see. So if you see this, if I see my cursor here, you see that here? So we see dogs. The system, our brains meaning, right? Our eyes, our brains see dogs. The so-called homo machina, the smart machine, the artificial intelligence is basically seeing this. And so it doesn't understand the object. It is trying to mimic it. It's trying through layers understand an image, for example, or a voice, and getting into an output that it indeed comes to the right decision. It's through this what we call convolutional neural networks by a guy, Jan LeCun, who is now the CTO at Facebook. He's the one that really came up successfully by putting forward this model, and that's where the companies like Apple and Google and you call them came up with Siri and Alexa, literally mimicking these images and being trained through big data and coming up with a solution. Again, I'm not here to explain you in detail the artificial intelligence side. What I want to do is just give you a hint how humans learn and how artificial intelligence learns. And there are some similarities, and that's the similarities you see there. But there are also a lot of differences, and that is what interests me, of course, because at the end of the day, the hypothesis is, and I think agreed by most scientists, that humans learn much faster and better as the biggest and the most supercomputer you have at the moment. We may not be so good in big data as computers are, but we are much more versatile and volatile and holistic in understanding relationships. And that's what I want to explain you. So if you're looking to the next slide, again, this I'm going to skip. Here, it shows you basically that learning, human learning, is eliminating, in fact, particular hypotheses. So we, in fact, like in statistics, in Bayesian statistics, we have a set of a priori hypotheses that we are projecting upon the data. And so it is clear that if you think about intelligence is nothing else as the process that converts unstructured information or big data or small data into a useful and actionable knowledge. That is how we can define intelligence. And that's applicable both to humans as well as to artificial intelligence. The difference is the way we learn, and that is crucial. And why is that crucial? Because if you understand that humans, they are thinking in symbolic representations and explicit theories or models of the world. Computers don't do that. Computers only go through data and find patterns to predict. They go into data, and through this kind of big data analytics, they are able to find patterns that allows them to predict a certain activity or whatever it is that you're looking at. Be it an autonomous vehicle that drives on the road, is nothing else as an incredible big machine of Bayesian statistics that predicts the next move in milliseconds. That's how it really works. It's not that the car understands how to drive. We understand that because we think in causal correlations. That computers cannot. Computers only think in correlations. They don't understand the connection between both in a model. That's the first big difference between humans and machines. The second is that we humans can share that with others through language. That is unique. And so if you're looking to the brain, the human brain, and this is quite interesting, the last part of the slide there, you see clearly that our human brain is a compromise. It's a compromise between nature and nurturing. What do I mean? Basically, our brain is, especially when you're young, when a baby is born, it is not that it doesn't have any innate abilities. It has a lot of innate abilities. It has a priori assumptions through our evolution that is basically a natural genetic underpinning of our ability to learn. It's as if we have a human highway when we're born with a priori assumptions, including emotions that are helping us to survive, like fear and so on and so forth. So it's not that the human brain, when you're born, we don't have anything. We have a lot of neutrons ready to grab, to understand the reality. So that's the first thing that the brain does. The second, and by the way, this a priori assumption is all unconscious. That part, artificial intelligence can copy to an extent. The second part, what I call here the a posteriori spontaneous neural activity, or the nurturing our self-organization, meaning learning as we do as young people or older people, is basically checking data and whether it is reflecting the model that we have learned or we brought up with, be it religion, culture, and so on and so forth. So the combination between an a priori innate evolutionary assumptions that is being called a highway is combined with an a posteriori plausibility of our brain that allows us to become smarter and wiser. That is quite an ability that computers do not have. What is that computers do not have and that we do have? We are better learners for the simple reason, one, we are flexible. We can communicate. If you program a computer to do something, he can do that very well as long as it has big data. But he cannot move that same thing to another context. He doesn't understand, or it does not understand another context. If you play chess, as my Russian friends here will understand, the Russians are great chess players. Now, with Google, he was able to beat the world champion, Kasparov, but that machine is not able to do anything else. It cannot provide me coffee, cannot do anything. It just be a chess player. So it can do this because it's being able to predict the moves in chess better as humans because they have more power capacity, but they're not smarter. Basically, you can say a computer is a dumb machine on steroids, but it's very fast. It's faster as we are in terms of data, but it cannot communicate. That's one. It doesn't have the plasticity. Our brains are incredibly plastic. We can move from one to the other, even if we get hurt. People with accidents or whatever it is, you would be surprised how other parts of our brain can take over. But also, even more important so, is that as I said earlier, our brains, we think in causal relationships. Even when they're not causal, we are trained to think in relationships that are causal, meaning cause consequence. That's how we survived, and that's how we're very well trained for the last 200,000 years. That's how a human being evaluated. And third, we have an autonomy, we have a self-conscious that computers do not have. So as long as computers do not have that self-consciousness, I cannot see how computers would ever take over from humans, the so-called cyborgs and all whatever the stories that you have heard of. So I don't see that happening. So I'm definitely less optimistic less optimistic about the future of AI as somebody like Harari with the Homo Deus, who says that the future is indeed artificial intelligence. I'm not sure about that for the last reason. One, the so-called self-consciousness of humans that computers do not have. I wanted to show you that kind of innate highway. And I think it is interesting. This is really the neuroscience, and I'm not a neuroscientist or a medical doctor, but here you see the incredible brain plasticity of a child, a newborn, up to 6 years. You see very clearly the first one. It is born with this synapses that are the founding material for learning. Okay, babies are learning machines really during their first years. And that kind of synaptic plasticity that you see evolving over these 5 years is visualized in that slide. It shows you the combination of what you're born with, the innate part, which is this, and the ability to have a language. All of us, every human being is born with an incredible ability to learn a mother tongue. Anybody. And that is constituted through our evolution, something that that artificial intelligence does not have. Second, I repeat, that small brain is tuned in to try to understand causal relationships. And it does it with a marvelous plasticity. If you look at the synapses growth over the first 6 years, it's incredible. You see that very clearly there. And that makes us indeed extremely powerful machines, almost, if I may call it machines, or I should say, we are extremely good in fast learning and in comparing context with different contexts. Again, a machine cannot do that. We are indeed like AI. We can look in we understand patterns. We recognize patterns as machines do. The difference is a baby with 2-3 examples understand immediately what this is about. A machine will need millions, if not billions of data to have not even understanding, but be able to do that correlation. Hence why, for example, Siri that is mimicking our language or trying to answer, it is because of years of billions of data languages that it was able to absorb, that it can mimic what a baby does in a few hours. And that is because that is natural development of human beings. And second, and this is crucial, we humans have that ability to think in abstract models, which means that we can give meaning. A computer does not understand, cannot give meaning. We are the only ones, even animals do not have that. We can provide meaning, be it imagined or real, whatever it is. That's a philosophical discussion, but that is something that is quite unique. And that meaning can be transferred from context to context through language, through linguistics, something that computers cannot. So the fundamental issue is that we ask the question, why? And you know, all babies and children, the whole time they're asking about why. Now that a computer will never ask. And that is why that why is referring to the model we're using. And so a child is born with this, but over the years is developing more accurate, granular models that fine-tunes the way we understand the world, whatever that is. And that is incredible if you're looking at the brain plasticity of it. And so we are indeed thinking in Bayesian terms. We are also thinking correlations, but the difference with the machine is we are doing it in a causal manner and we communicate it. That is the big difference between computers. And this is a visual. You see here, computers are very good in pure Bayesian probabilities. It does it very well. It can make associations, as you see there. Computers are even better as us to make associations because we are not very good in big data. We're very good with small data because that's how we have evolved and how we have survived. Big data is something that our brain has difficulties with. Now, that's where computers are doing a great job. But the highest form that you can see there, we also have that kind of ability of counterfactuals, which means we can think in causal models. We have the creativity and the imagination to think about realities that do even not exist yet. That is something a machine cannot at this point. I know that there's researchers at MIT, they're trying to move to that stage. And this gentleman, Mr. Pearl, professor at UCLA in Los Angeles, he wrote an interesting, incredibly good book. And he says, as long as a computer doesn't or cannot make that causal relationship and cannot answer the whys that we automatically do as a child and as a grown-up being, as long as a computer cannot do that, it will never match the ability of humans. And so we are incredibly powerful in that sense to create new realities and to imagine new realities. And like this slide is showing, a computer is very good in executing the the commands put in by the programmer. In this case, you clean up the room every day. The problem is the computer or the people. Let's say you are on a Friday night and you have some drinks and you want to have let's say a sleep in on Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, and you didn't program that. The computer doesn't care. It doesn't understand that you are sleeping, and he doesn't knock on the door in that sense. He just does what is ordered. So he doesn't understand context. So the computer just does what it does every day, autonomously, over and over again. But it doesn't understand anything what's going on. It doesn't understand context. A human meaning sees immediately if somebody is sleeping, you don't disturb. That a computer doesn't understand. It doesn't understand context, and that is the crucial difference. Now that brings me then to the issue of the learning abilities of human beings. As I said, we are extremely good in forming hypotheses and turning it into knowledge. Now, from a neuroscientific perspective, what we do is, which in itself is incredible, basically our a priori assumptions that are part of our brain, as I mentioned already, will unconsciously process a lot of data around us. It's the neocortex, the latest part of our brain. You have a reptilian, a limbic, and a neocortex. So the last part of our brain, the last evolutionary part of our brain, the neocortex, is the part that is consciously picking up the data that are matching our hypothesis a posteriori. So it's that combination of unconsciousness that is absorbing all the data, and it's us consciously then who are trying to make sense of this data. And that is also why Sigmund Freud said very clearly, in the place where Ekaterina is right now, said very clearly, the unconsciousness needs to become consciousness. That is exactly the same thing. So he was quite right to say that, and that is a computer can never do. That consciousness is something that computers lack, and we have that innate ability to turn a lot of our data, including emotions that we may not be even aware of, are part of our survival and are helping us to provide data, a lot of data, very different data. But we only can pick up so much. That's the limitation of the human brain. It's our a posteriori modeling that's picking up data to make sense, to create sense. And all the rest is ignored. So that's also something that I like you to understand. Here, without going into too much details, but this was for me an eye-opener. We all in business talk about these issues of wisdom. For me, the difference between wisdom and smartness is that a smart executive can make reasonable decisions. But those decisions are not necessarily holistic or systemic or take into account a broader public. A wise decision maker, a wise leader is somebody who understands the ethical implications, the other persons involved. He or she may even take into account the environment, which is a big issue today. Now, what is astounding, what is to me was a revelation, was that even our brains are making that difference. So smartness is not the same as wisdom. The activated parts of our brain to think about other people are slightly different from the activated parts of our brain if we just take the normal, what we call here the low road. Now, for those interested, there is also a psychologist who got the Nobel Prize economics for that, Professor Kahneman from Princeton. He came up with the idea of two systems, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is indeed that intuitive gut feeling understanding, which is the lower road, which is a different part of our brain that is activated, versus system 2, which is our reflective mode, or what is being called here the higher mode or the higher road, that can lead to ethics. And so it is literally two different pieces of our brain or different parts of our brain that are activated the way we think. If we think more about the easy way, how much does it count, short term, we would take particular, part of our brains, as you can see there, in our reactive self-referencing center, okay, which is the medial prefrontal cortex, as you can see on that slide. Whereas if you think more about what could be the consequences for other people, and thinking more about the consequences, which means causal thinking and longer term thinking, then we are apparently using a slightly different, what we call deliberative self-referencing center, that is the so-called dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, which is different, I repeat, from the earlier one. And here is the visual. I will not go in detail, but here literally you see that if you're mindful, and again, going back here, being mindful is the same here as taking the high road, or what we call the ethical brain. If you're not thinking about it, if you're not mindful, if you're not aware, you're going for the easier way. It's not necessarily selfish, but is the easy way how we have survived. And that's a different part of our neocortex that has been activated. And I thought that is very interesting as well. And so, in addition, I have to say that for the latest 10 years, emotions and rationality are not anymore pitted against each other. So cognitive scientists today do not see an opposition between emotions and rationality. Emotions help us to reason. In fact, without emotions, we wouldn't even be able to reason. And the philosophical notion of to wonder about something, to be surprised, is really related to an innate emotion of a desire of us to explore and to understand the world. And so you could even argue now, without emotions, you cannot even think rationally, and which is a paradoxical statement. I'm aware of this. And one of the first Western philosophers who did see that was David Hume. He basically was clear about that emotions are not something that you should ignore and something that is bad, as many people think it is. On the contrary, we could use it, of course, as long as we're mindful and as long as we are very clear and aware of what kind of emotions we're going to use, of course. So again, I'll try to explain first how our brain is constituted. And I said the brain is a compromise between an innate highway that allows us to learn in causal terms and communicate that through our language. That's the first. Babies are learning machines. Within the first 6 years, the synapses that you have seen are incredibly multiplied. And that is exactly what babies do. They learn language, understanding, environment. All these things are basically the personal experiences that constitute who you are. But there is an innate part that you're born with genetically, okay? And then I said, okay, if you're an adult and you're an executive, the way you make decisions, the way you're using your brains is even different. You can take the lower road or the higher road. And that difference in the way we activate our brain parts is having an effect on the decisions we make. And so if you talk about wiser decision making, then somehow you are thinking in more holistic terms, and you are thinking more about other people. You're thinking about different contexts like the social, ethical, ecological issues. You transcend biases. You're trying to be pragmatic and overcome paradoxes. So in other words, which is not a topic today, but wise decision making to me is crucial to create a better world, a better business world. One that is not necessarily opposing doing the right thing and making money. That is not necessarily true. I think by taking the right way, you can still create and generate a lot of value for you and your shareholders as well. So there's no necessarily an opposition between both. And here I'm saying that AI may make us smarter, but definitely not wiser. AI at the moment, and I foresee for the next 20 years, will do what we humans are telling computers to do. And AI has an incredible predictive power in terms of big data, which we may not be able to match. But we are much better in understanding different contexts and imagination. We are the ones who can make wise decisions because we can think causally, including the long-term consequences, which an AI cannot really do that well. Unless you provide them the data and you train the computer for a particular task to do so, then yes, you can. And then again, provocatively, I'm arguing that our human weakness, which is basically our ability to think in terms of emotions and be driven by emotions somehow, well, that is also our ultimate strength, because that is what allows us to be creative. That allows us to imagine different worlds. So that is something that I feel is very typical human and crucial. And yes, I think we humans and executives, businesses should collaborate with AI. This is an obvious example where AI will be more precise in terms of operations than any human hand can possibly, but it's still the human who will direct it, in my humble opinion. I'm going to skip this. This is really about where the collaboration is possible. I don't mind to explore that a little bit later on if time allows. Just briefly to show you now very concretely in a business context, in finance, which is a bit my background as well. If you're looking at those functionalities, then you see very clearly here the accounting procedures to a high extent will be automated and will be taken over by AI. Similar, if you look to cash disbursement and revenue management, all that will be likely automated by AI. So artificial intelligence will be able to automate particular processes or augment the decision power of humans. But here at the bottom, you see very clearly business development, relationships, audit, and management, where you need to deal with humans. That is something that computers will not be able to. And the reason is simple. They cannot communicate, they cannot understand context. If you are negotiating with other people, with other organizations, you need to understand the context of the organization, you need to understand the other person, you need to have the emotional intelligence, all that a computer is lacking. Even today, there is some interesting research in Stanford where some researchers bring in emotions into computers, but it's the same thing again. It's mimicking the emotions based on big data, how people would normally react emotionally in a particular way. So computers will be able to mimic emotions, but that doesn't mean they really understand it. And you can easily fool computers, which is the so-called Turing test that you may be familiar with. And so wise decision making is indeed what this is all about. I'm going to skip a few slides. So this one is showing you that our brains are not just intellectually turning data into usable knowledge and action, but in addition, something that AI does not have, we have these emotions that allows us to be compassionate and at the same time to keep a distance from people, while at the same time we also have that moral integrity which is an ability that computers do not have, as well as we are risk takers, but at the same time we are risk averse. And this four, expressed in a paradoxical manner, can create trust. A computer cannot create trust, it does do tasks. And so it's only because there is trust possible between beings that indeed wise decision is possible. If there is no trust, if there's no emotion, if there's no understanding of it, you just make a decision that's smart or competent, but it doesn't understand it, so hence why it cannot be a wise decision. And that brings me to my last but one slide. Leadership for me, and especially the ethical brain, if you like, then, of smart and wise leadership, is being a poet and being a plumber. And what I mean by that is that plumbers are people that are having technical skills and understand how to get things done. That's what managers need to do. Poets are the ones that imagine, that are inspiring people, that are able to create a new reality. Now, that is what leaders need to be. And it's the same if you're then looking at, in a metaphor, leaders need to win the heart, which is basically the emotions in the limbic brain part, as well as the mind, which is the rational part in our neocortex. And so there is no problem with science, and I love science, but as a human being, the art is necessary, the poetry is necessary to inspire other human beings. And the fact that we can answer the why question, we are always looking at understanding reality, that makes us potentially more holistic than any artificial entity that you can imagine. And therefore, my last slide says, listen, wise leadership is necessary, and we will need it even more so with dealing with artificial intelligence that is happening as we speak. But the most beautiful and the most powerful way of leaders and human beings in general is that we can imagine something. We can imagine a more creative, aesthetical and ethical world. That may sound a little bit fluffy, but it is something that can become more sustainable. The fact that we can do it, that we understand, that we provide models, even whatever model you can imagine, is something that computers cannot do for the time being. Computers only learn through being trained and even self-learning through data that are provided. But it's looking to patterns, historical data. We are not looking to the past and the present only. We can create the future. We can imagine a future that is different, which is hard, and which is sometimes scary. And that's exactly what we're facing today as well with the pandemic. But let's try to overcome our fear, which is an emotion, and deal with it in a way that helps us to move on and create something that's worth living for. And that is, in my opinion, something that the computers for the next 20, 30 years, if not longer, will not be able to do. And that is because we have that self-awareness. We are mindful. We can mentalize. And we are indeed able, as we just do right now, able to communicate that through a language that can be shared. I would say thank you, and I'm open for any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for a great presentation. We already have a lot of questions for you, but before we switch to them, I suggest we do a small poll that we prepared. So let me just stop sharing the screen and the comfortable format of your sitting on the sofa and me trying to moderate the questions. There are many of them, and the first very technical question: would your presentation will be available for our audience? Would you be able to share it? Okay, wonderful. So we will organize that. That's the easiest part. And I will now ask Vitaly to put our questions on the screen so the audience can do a small engagement here with the number of questions that we had. I hope we can see them on the screen now. And while I don't see anything happening right now, but maybe it's just the speaker's mode. Vitaly? Okay, so we'll start with questions now, because today is the day of technical issues, I suppose. It looks like, yeah, the questions are there. Wonderful. So after a few moments of hesitation, there were 3 questions that we prepared for you, but I would ask you to go and ask them, do answer all of these 3 questions. And if in 1 minute, we will try and see how we're doing in terms of covering the topics that we selected on them. So the first question, should we heavily invest in education, especially in social sciences, as much, if not more than in technology sciences, to increase human ability to remain innovative? The second question is, I think we should limit research on artificial intelligence to save jobs, if you agree or disagree. And the third question, although emotions may be a social reality, we should exclude them in our decision making. And let's say we have another 30 seconds to finish the voting process, and then we will start with the questions that we collected in the chat box. Okay, so 10 more seconds, and if I click finish voting, I hope we can see what would be the result. Okay, so do you see them on the screen now?
Yes, I do.
Looks like if any comments coming from your side.
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in science, so we definitely should invest in that. But what I do see that I believe in balance and in harmony. And sometimes people believe that we should invest in data scientists and artificial intelligence and all that, and I agree with that. But here, I am indeed trying to say, listen, what are we excelling in? And we are excelling in not just making computers, because computers may be even better as us in terms of pattern recognition. But what we can do and computers cannot is that creativity. And therefore, art and social sciences are so powerful and so important. And honestly speaking, I have to admit that in my own business experience, my philosophical background did help me a lot in terms of understanding the other person. Even when I was a negotiator on behalf of IMF and the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia, where I had to debt restructuring organizations and dealing with other people, and some of them not necessarily the most ethical people, that didn't matter. We had to find solutions. And the fact that you could tune in, which is called in neuroscience, mirroring your neurons literally with the other person, trying to understand in negotiation these people, that is something that I think we can learn in social sciences. So the soft side of human being, creativity, imagination, poetry, and of course understanding how our brains function, which is a pure science, it's that combination that makes us powerful. So I would say yes, both.
Yeah, so we have great answers here. Everybody agrees that, yeah, it should be a balance. And everyone thinks that there should be no limitations to research on artificial intelligence. And yeah, our audience disagrees that emotions may be a social reality which should be excluded in our decision making. And that brings me to the very first question in our chat box from Anna Griznova, Vice Dean for International Affairs, who actually was the person who connected us, Peter, because Anna is the one who is in charge of the International Week in Antwerp on behalf of our School of Business. And she asks, what do you think about emotions? Can they play against human in the competition with computers?
Yes. The short answer is yes. It can. Emotions can be a disadvantage, especially when you are playing, let's say, chess or Go or whatever. If we're not careful and we are controlled by our emotions, then indeed, like fear, then indeed we may lose competitively easily from artificial intelligence. But at the same time, if you can enlighten yourself, being mindful, stand, which is also an emotion, it's driven by a deep emotion of trying to understand. That kind of balance helps us, I think, to compete with computers. So yes, it can be a disadvantage if we are driven too much by it, if it's not in balance with our rationality, but it can be also a very powerful tool by reasoning with other people while at the same time being compassionate. And compassion is, for example, an emotion. And that's why we're using granularly, a different word for empathy, sympathy, and compassion. And so in that sense, they're all three emotions, but they're different. And so, yes, I would say in a lot of circumstances in business, it can be a disadvantage if you're too emotional. Obviously, you should be calm, but at the same time, emotions, feelings, sensitivity can be also powerful.
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether
that's the question. Yeah, in Russia we have this duality between poets and lyrics and physics, and now it seems like to be a wise manager you need to be both, and that's the point of wise leadership and the whole concept that you were presented today, right?
Yeah, also because teams, if you're dealing with teams in an organization, you try to be competitive. How do you motivate your people? It's not just a salary. It's not just an extrinsic motivator like remuneration. It's really the intrinsic motivation, and the way you deal with that, you need to be very sensitive to people. And so their emotions can be very powerful in a positive manner.
Okay, wonderful. So let's move to the next question from Vasily Sukhamlinov. He's saying, some scientists say that human beings are just a sum of algorithms, and we need just some time to make AI algorithms as efficient as humans' algorithms. What do you think about that?
Very good question. That is the idea of many AI scientists. People like Kurzweil at MIT. You have, of course, LeCun at Facebook, but also a lot of professors like Russell at Toronto University, the real, let's say, great minds, Hingens. So a lot of those researchers, Tenenbaum, and you keep on going, Pearl, they would say that the more algorithms will be able to embrace the different variables that are mimicking the way we make decisions, the more powerful these algorithms will become. And as I mentioned, I don't know the lady's name anymore, but she took a PhD at Stanford, and she's now having a company that is mimicking the emotions into an algorithm, making computers, robots, a little bit more emotional so they can deal with aging people, because in a lot of homes, nursing homes, there is not enough people. And so, especially in Japan, for example, these robots need to be, quote unquote, a little bit sensitive. That is what scientists are trying to do. But in my opinion, computers will evolve, but they will never be able to have the same kind of communication that we have as human beings, including humor. Try to humor your Siri or your Alexa, and you will see how it reacts.
Or soul-to-soul conversations that we have.
Because they don't understand the context. Humor is always taking words, notions out of context, which makes it sometimes funny. Now, that is an ability of contextualizing and thinking in models and moving one model to another, and computers are not very good at that. But yes, that's exactly what AI tries to do. They're trying to copy our brains as much as possible, and they've succeeded the unconscious part, the data gathering and the data pattern recognition. That part that we are doing automatically, we are not conscious about that. That's subconscious. That is exactly what these neural networks are doing, and the applications you see now in your smartphones, in computers, That is exactly what they're doing. What they don't do, what they cannot do, meaning computers, is that conscious part, the reflection that we can do about thinking in models, the imagination that we can have, poetry and whatsoever. That is something that computers at the moment cannot, and I don't see that happening for the next 20 years. But beyond, yes, who am I to judge? We don't know how science will evolve. But I strongly believe that that ability of babies that you saw, that kind of highway that we are born with, that's very hard to mimic. And ability of this, let's say, the growth of the synapses over the first years to an incredible amount of billions, 8 billion synapses, I think it was, that is something that computers, I don't see that's happening.
Yes, and probably intuition, that's not something that robots will be ever able to do. Another part of that. But I don't want to be asking questions myself. I have a whole list of my dear colleagues who are involved and engaged. The next question comes from St. Petersburg, from my colleague Maxime Starchoy. He's a professor of ethics, and he asks the following: great leaders should be ethical leaders. Can neuroscience help with this?
My colleague Steven Poelmans, we have at Antwerp a neuro lab. And what it does is, it's exactly trying to measure through this EEC, which is just, I wouldn't say superficial manner of understanding some of the brain activities in our neocortex, to see how our brains are functioning. Now, your question is twofold. First, yes, I guess executives need to be ethical. Fine, that's exactly what wise decision is about. But you can train people, yes. If you train people, it's the same like in meditation. Once you start meditation, it becomes a practice. That is what you call an expert. An expertise, even playing piano, which is practicing, or driving a bicycle, you need to practice as a baby to do so, a young person. That knowledge becomes innate, becomes tacit. And so to me, being ethical is part of being brought up through your culture, through your religion, whatever that is, but also being confronted through cases and practicing, being aware of those tensions, being aware of the paradoxes that we face in business and in life in general. So ethical is not necessarily something, well, some people will argue that the ethical brain, we are innate. As I said, you can take that higher road. So we innate as an ability, but you still need to drive on that higher road. So you still need to activate to be able to think more about the others than think about yourself. And research has shown in a lot of interesting empirical facts there, when they are studying and researching Buddhist monks, and one of them is quite famous. It's called The Most Happy Man on the Planet, Mathieu Ricard, who is the translator in French for Dalai Lama. It is obvious that the way the way his brains are functioning is quite outstanding, and is taking that ethical, what you would call the ethical road, to that particular part of our neocortex in a very different manner than normal people do. And that means you can train. And yes, we all are born with that ability, at least, because we are social beings. That is what mirror neurons do. We are able to connect in an automatic manner. A baby does that. It is proven that babies have that ability. And so the question is how you practice it. How do you become more attuned to it? And there are many ways to do it. We wrote some papers as well. As I said, my colleague is trying to measure that and train and see whether that has an effect on your particular brain activities in Antwerp. And there are so many labos who are doing that. But at the end of the day, it is we human beings, who need to be mindful, to be aware, to meditate, to practice, to whatever, pray, you may call it that way, that's fine with me. That is the manner that you become more aware of those other realities, not just yourself. And I think that's part of what also executives should do. And that's where my governance my governance expertise comes in. Unfortunately, the American Anglo-Saxon environment has always been preaching primacy of shareholder value and profitability. Now, if you're trained to do so, as businesses are in MBAs, then of course you forget that higher road. And I'm happy to see that at least in particular business schools all over the planet, that now people start to be aware of the importance of ethical, as we call it in governance, the ESG, environment, social, and governance issues that are more and more important even to investors. So yes, we can learn.
Yeah, and we're doing the same in Moscow. So we are following the stakeholder model of capitalism, and that's what we're teaching, including Maxime. And I have the following question coming again from Anna. It connects to the previous one, and she asks if there's anything that neuroscience can tell us about preferences for ethical and non-ethical decisions. If you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, again, I mean, I should be very, I should be also mindful and be humble here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a neuroscientist, so I've studied a little bit, but I'm not a surgeon who will be going to the brains and fix things. I can tell you this. Let me give you an extreme example. And this is an example I got from Gazinga, a very famous neuroscientist who is researching people with accidents and not necessarily acting normally. But also, we are more and more researching, let's say, people, CEOs who are quite narcissistic. It's a well-known fact. Now, when you're narcissistic, you will see that particular brains, or that part of your brain activity is different from others. Now, you can then say, okay, that's how our brain works. That's not my responsibility. I'm born or I'm educated by my parents and my culture that way, or by my school to think about profitability and to think about myself and my company, and I don't care about all the rest. But that doesn't work, because responsibility is not something even a narcissistic CEO can ignore. Why not? Because humans have survived in communities. We are social beings, and responsibility is the expression of norms in our interaction with other people. And that interaction you cannot just put aside. You can be narcissistic, fine, and you can do whatever you want for yourself, but that doesn't preclude that you can ignore responsibilities as an organization that you would take as an organizer, as a CEO, or as a leader, or as a human being. And so what I'm really saying is that the brains just indicate which part we're using, the high road and the low road. And please read that article in detail. It is very clear that there are different parts activated. But if you just adhering to neuroscience and you think mechanically that brains are just neurons and enzymes and hormones that are processing data into our synapses and coming with an outcome like a computer, well, then that doesn't mean that you would just say, oh, I'm not responsible because it's my brain who does it. That's not how it works. The brains are a tool. It's still a responsibility of every of us to do the right thing and be wise. Again, it may not be a satisfactory answer, but I would highly recommend you to have a look at that picture. And it is clear that different parts of our brains are activated. Similarly, Kahneman, when he writes about the system 1 and system 2, is saying the same thing. So there seems to be now a common sense, there seems to be now an understanding among most neuroscientists that there are different parts of our brain activated in neocortex that is basically related to a different way of thinking. And I think that is quite revealing, because it shows that we can learn. And so there is no excuse, not even for a narcissistic CEO who may think, well, that's the way I do it. Well, that doesn't mean that you cannot try at least to become a more enlightened person. And that's maybe a philosophical, linguistic norm or notion I'm using here. But at least I don't see excuses for being just being self-oriented or short-term oriented.
Okay, wonderful. And since we started with narcissism, we now have a next question again from Maxime Starchevo about corporate psychopaths. That many corporate top managers are displaying this kind of behavior, and the reason is that their brain has problems with experiencing empathy and guilt. And what do you think about that? Would you agree or not?
Can you repeat the last question, empathy and guilt, again?
So that comes from Robert Haar. I suppose the result of the research that corporate top managers are psychopaths. And I know that my colleague Günther Stahl at the WU Vienna does the same research. Here the issue is that brain has problems with experiencing empathy and guilt. So would you agree with that? That top managers, and we know the corporation, the famous documentary that just got the new version this year from our Canadian colleagues, and yeah, about the feelings and how exactly.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are many ways of answering that. You can answer from a psychoanalytical perspective, which I'm not going to do here, but you can also. Let's stick to the neuroscience because that's the topic of today. Mm-hmm. It is clear that if a child under 6 years, where its neuroplasticity has been exponentially growing, if a child did not receive the understanding and the meaning of love and care and warmth from his parents or her parents, and particularly the mother, that child is deprived of an important tool, if I may call it, in its adult life. And so psychopaths, now this goes far. I'm not getting into the whole debate about karma and the reincarnation stuff. I'm not going to get there. But what you can say is, suppose that you have, as a born child, two siblings. One child is or maybe not siblings, just two different child with the same kind of family, with the same kind of highway born enzymes and synapses, the one you have seen on that particular chart. If that person compared to another is not educated in a loving family, that can have profound implications for its later life. And so who's to be blamed? Well, maybe not fully the child, but as an adult, having become a psychopath and getting into an executive position, again, does not mean to me that you are absolved of any responsibility, in legal terms even. So there is this tendency to use neuroscience in courts to say, listen, it's not him, he's not responsible for that because it's his brains who are forced him to do so, to take that action. That I don't buy, and no neuroscientist would agree with that. You always have the chance to learn, to practice, and to rectify particular behavior. But admittedly, if that child has been brought up in a very cold environment, and there has been, I mean, in Romania, when Yugoslavia, what's his name again? The dictator. Say it again.
The Ceausescu.
Yes, Ceausescu. When he passed away, when he was murdered, I should say, there were orphanages of children that had no ability to communicate properly, and they were deprived from any. And so you can see from a neuroscientific perspective, these children didn't have the full plasticity at that point of 6, 7, 8 years old. But they still can learn. They developed an ability, but much slower and much harder to learn. So yes, I mean, I don't have the full answer there, but yes, the fact that they may not feel guilt and empathy, which is part of that loving family which you refer to, is something that we are brought up. In fact, there's a whole Freudian analysis on guilt and shame. Again, not something that we should explore right now, but I do agree that if we're not fully brought up in an environment that you could expect from from any family or educative environment, that feeling of emotion, of guilt and empathy may lack. And if you don't have that, well, that will lead to psychopaths and all the consequences. Yes, and that's of course not a good thing.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a couple more practical questions from Chris, and he asks, how does one as a leader deal with colleagues who are less emotional?
It's a very good question. How do you deal with people that do not have the emotional intelligence? That's basically your question.
Yeah, exactly.
Be compassionate. Do not blame them for not having that ability that you may have, being an emotional, tuned-in person that is compassionate. So have patience, be compassionate, and try to communicate as much as you can and explain why you're doing what you're doing and why you don't feel that it was appropriate. It's interesting to read studies about autism and autistic people. It is quite interesting how you can still communicate with them. I would highly recommend you to read some of those research on autism. And don't forget, some of those people, some of those autistic people and emotionally maybe less sensitive people are incredibly talented, especially to program and to be very focused on particular tasks. Because their brains that they may lack in sensitivity are used for some other calculations, making algorithms working much better than the people who need part of their synapses for emotions. It's true. We only have 1.5 kilogram brain and so many billions of synapses. We need to use them in an optimal manner. And emotions are taking some part of that. And so less sensitive people may be very good in something else that we sensitive people may not have. So do not blame them. It's hard sometimes, I do admit, and very frustrating. Let me put it this way. I don't think that people who have not the emotional sensitivity can be good leaders. I think a good leader needs to have that sensitivity. But it doesn't mean that somebody who is not sensitive or less sensitive and less emotional tuned in, that person cannot do a good job. They can be very good in particular tasks. So I would be very compassionate.
Okay, wonderful. The second part of the question goes directly to human relationships, but we'll try to avoid it. We're staying with our key topic. And the next question comes from Professor Filinov. And he asks the following: a computer program can perfectly mimic a percussionist's performance, but this artificial music is less accepted than the one performed by a human being. It turns out that mistakes of a human percussionist make the music warmer and more attractive. Does it mean that great leader must do small mistakes in order to be loved by followers? People dislike perfection. Could you please comment on this?
I love that statement. Isn't it true that we humans love the imperfections of each other? If somebody is too good to be true, then we say, "Oh, that's a super perfect." It's almost like a robot. As I said, emotions are powerful and useful, but we also are over emotional, and we are, in that sense, we can be very egocentric if we are too emotional centered to ourselves. That's a weakness. But that makes us vulnerable. But it's that vulnerability that can be also a strength. And so that on the emotional part. Now on the art part, the difference between a computer making a piece of art, is that an artist imagine a new reality. When Picasso or Monet or Van Gogh, you just named them, or Stravinsky, any musicians, I mean, whatever it is, any artists, novels. I mean, Ekaterina knows that I'm a big lover of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy.
One day we'll have you in Moscow, I promise you. As long as this whole horror is over, the invitation is open. We will be happy.
I love to do that. But the point is that those people were able to imagine, pure imagination, a better world or a different world. That a computer cannot. A computer can mimic it, and you can program to do slightly different things, but it does it mechanically. It's that kind of, indeed, human touch that is most likely not perfect that makes us human. But that is exactly what we love. And that's exact because, of course, it's humans against humans or humans. So I don't dare to say that computers will never be able to make art. I don't say that. But at the moment, I would argue that as it stands right now, they can copy existing art, fine-tune it even, but they don't come up with something new. It's basically a repetitive task of something done by a creative artist. And that itself is not necessarily creative to me. It's very smart. It can even be beautiful, but it's not what I call a new reality. It's basically based on a reality that existed. But again, I'm on thin ice. I'm aware that some people may argue that computers may create art. I'm not of that opinion. I still believe at this moment, because of that part of imagination, which a computer cannot. It can do what if, which is basically a statistical proposition with inferences that are pure correlations, but it doesn't see the causality. That a computer does not understand. It mimics whatever you have provided and how much you trained it with beautiful art craft, but it mimics it. It doesn't understand, and it will be built up on that and make something slightly different, but it doesn't create something new. That is the way I interpret it at the moment.
Okay, wonderful for that. Let's move back to artificial intelligence. And the next question comes from Nitik Natko, Vice Dean at Our Business School. And I'll just read out. It's a long one, but a few sentences, if you bear with me. So he refers to Peter Drucker, who wrote a classical HBO article, Manager and the Moron, in the McKinsey Quarterly in 1967, supporting similar arguments on computers. Yet here we are in 2020 with many aspects of traditional aspects of management taken away from manager by the data-driven moron, organizing, controlling even decisions on staffing and talent development. We invest in automation, helping machine to widen its context. So is there a chance that with AI, we will narrow the human role in management to leading just?
Thanks for the question. Short answer, yes, we will. AI will take over. Let me give examples. In credit banking, something I know reasonably well since I was, as I mentioned, negotiating on behalf of IMF, the debt of banks that went sour with the Asian crisis in '97. But even, and again, with the global financial crisis, if you're looking at credits, let's say mortgage credits, a credit officer will be affected by the other side of the table, meaning a human being. It will be affected through emotions, for bad or right or good reason. A computer, an algorithm, will look at basically 4 variables to grant or not grant a mortgage loan. 1, where do you live? And that will indicate the welfare and wealth state of you as an individual, because it's related to a particular area, whether in Moscow, St. Petersburg, or wherever in the world. Number 2, your income. Number 3, most likely some of your background, your education, and there is maybe a 4th variable. It has been proven that based on these 4 variables, through a lot of big data, that a computer on average does a better job in providing basic credit for mortgages, not this kind of sophisticated financial services that we have as well, but purely for mortgage credits, that the computer does pretty well. In fact, slightly better as a credit officer. And so for that one, basically a computer will take over. The other example is in health, in medicine. Radiologists, they're looking at the screens of let's say, to find whether there is cancer or whether there will be cancer in the future. Apparently, based on millions of data by top hospitals in the US, today algorithms are able to predict quite accurately through the pattern recognition of those, let's say, screens that are produced of patients, that they can predict quite accurately whether somebody will get cancer or has cancer, and even surprisingly found another correlation that some of people may be prone to schizophrenia that medical doctors couldn't even think of. So in that sense, you see that AI and algorithms are very useful. So I'm a big believer of AI and using AI in a very collaborative manner. I'm not against AI, on the contrary. I see AI to take, and you see that even in another one, farming. You see clearly that in farming, the big farms, I guess both in Russia as in US, that a lot of those vehicles that harvest are now automated. That's pure Bayesian statistics. What if, and they know how to do it. And so the algorithms are so fine-tuned now that you can do a lot and automate a lot of processes that are repetitive. So if you have big data and it's repetitive or it are familiar problems, the computer will do a pretty good job. However, if the data are very small, like you have to negotiate in a very different context that you not even know before, or you make an investment of billions or billions of dollars that is new to you, or you don't have a lot of data on, and it is indeed a unique decision, so you don't have the big data, and it's a unique decision, their computers will not do as good job as humans. So it is quite clear to me that computers will help us a lot in automating quite a lot of processes that are very repetitive. So robots taking packages and so forth. Why would humans bother? Let humans do more interesting stuff. Big proponent of that. And number two, we can use, as a radiologist, as I give the example, we can use computers and algorithms to augment our ability. I mean, again, why is Netflix so powerful? Netflix is powerful because they were the first one who had a great recommendation engine. They are able to accurately predict the content of a particular movie. Netflix started as an organization basically competing with Blockbuster. Today, they are number one, but there's competition today. But they are the number one in terms of streamlining movies. But not only that, they have become not just a streamlining and internet company, they have become an entertainment company directly competing with Walt Disney and other movie makers in Hollywood or wherever you have them. And why? For one simple reason. They know from us data what we like. Very simple. Mm-hmm. And they can accurately predict movies that we're going to like. Hence why they have reduced the risk of investing billions of dollars in content. They're taking the risk because they know that most likely that movie will be a success. Today, they're spending $15 billion a year in this kind of business. And now you see Walt Disney entering the same four, so does Amazon with Prime and so does Apple. But they are ahead with an incredibly highly accurate recommendation engine. And that is pure algorithms. It allows companies to become competitive. So I'm a big proponent of it. But what I've tried to say in this brief lecture, that humans have the ability to learn faster and better, especially when there is no big data, because that ability computers do not have, for the reasons I've explained to you. But use it where you can. It will be, if those who will not embrace digitization and AI, they will lose competitiveness. They will, at their peril, not embracing it. So do not misunderstand me. I'm a big fan of AI, but I'm trying to see the limitations from a business perspective and obviously also from an ethical perspective, which I didn't touch here. The whole issue around privacy, the misuse of data, all that is the whole issue around cybersecurity. I didn't even touch upon that. So yes, I'm a big believer of AI, which Peter Drucker couldn't foresee. And AI has made enormous progress, especially the last 10 years, because of the fact, and this is crucial, because they were able to mimic the hierarchical layers in our brains, which is called, as you know, in deep learning, machine learning, the convolutional neural networks by some researchers. And that made it so powerful for practical applications. Well, I hope that was the question.
I think it did. Great. And I think we just have 3 more minutes left for the last question. And I think it comes
I don't
from
mind
a student.
More if you feel like it, Katerina. I don't mind to go a little bit longer if there are many questions. Go ahead. You decide.
So, I think that comes from a student, Irina Kozlova, and that's what she's saying. Since the leadership is about decision-making, I have a question about it. I used to study in neural networks, and our professor used to show us a white square with vertical black line exactly in the middle of it. So just bear with me. He made us make a decision on whether the line shifted left or right, which was impossible to define. But still, the students voted differently. So my question is, what is actually a nature of making such decisions? And is it possible to teach the AI to make such decisions? Because they are not logical and mainly based on our previous life experience and our brain process. So kind of a very esoteric question, and comes back to many points that you touched upon with wise leadership and decision making.
Okay, computers only see 0 ones, and computers are applying Bayesian statistics, if, when. And they're extremely powerful because they can, through the processing power that we have on the cloud, number one. Number two, the ability and availability of big data, which we didn't have 10 years ago, today we have. And the connectivity, so the big data are the fuel of the machine. The hardware, the processing power is something that we have today, which was not available 10 years ago through the cloud and the processing powers of these computers. And number three, the algorithms, the way that they have been structured these days are so good that indeed it allows computer scientists somehow to mimic particular decisions that are straightforward, especially when you have big data. Computers are very logic. It's only what 0 ones, what if. It's pure statistics. It is extreme logic. And so computer science, something I didn't study, but having seen my programmers working, it can be very logical. So there's no doubt in my mind, it's pure mathematics and statistics. And that's what you learn. That's what data analysts are doing. We humans think very differently. And that makes it difficult. You need to have a particular focus to study computer science. So your professor was trying to push you to not see as a human being. That's why I've shown you that. I think that the third slide that you may have a look at again later on. A computer only see, let's say this 1 0 ones, and indeed, what was it now? Data 0 ones. It doesn't see the object. It's through this convolutional, let's say, networking and layering hierarchical that it comes to the face of a dog or a cat or a human being. And that's exactly, I think that's chapter 1, 2, and 3 of computer science and programming in artificial intelligence, deep machine learning. That's exactly what they do. So your professor was right, but I guess you and me may not be the best students.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question I think also comes from a student who's the leader of the project development and use of computer simulations in science, industry, and business, which has been at our School of Business. And the question that he asks, you'll like it. How in our turbulent time with high volatility, a leader can adequately and most fully take into account the emergent risks?
The beauty of humans in charge of organization, especially not just smart, but wise leaders, are humans that master the art of the possible. And even more so, they're not afraid of the uncertainty and the turbulence around it. They see in that turbulent future that is unknown to us, possibilities, opportunities to create models, realities that we may try to strive for, hopefully for the better of humankind, that leaders always, and entrepreneurs, innovators always see possibilities in crises. So let's be very clear about it. When we talk about risk has two sides. You have the negative threat, the risk aversion, which is the fear emotion in our brains. But similarly, risk is also looking at opportunities in the future that did not exist yet, or what we call in our brains, the desire to understand something new. And any baby will try to find new stuff that he doesn't or she doesn't know yet and try to understand it. That is a profound human emotion that young people have. And so as an adult, I would say, yes, we are risk averse. We should be careful, but we still should take risk, because if we don't do so, if you reduce all activities to we have to avoid threats, you're never going to win. The beauty of humankind is it took risks, and we do it hopefully together as a team, because that's how we survived for the last 400,000 years. So risk-taking is part of what humankind is. And risk-taking, and that's business terms, isn't it, is exactly the same as imagine. Imagine if we do this. And the fact that I'm using these words is almost statistical thinking. We are basically incredible algorithms. We are willing to put new variables in our brain algorithm, if I may use that metaphor. And so I would not be afraid of the future. On the contrary, I would embrace it. And businesses always see opportunities in crises. As there is a saying, never waste a good crisis, isn't it? That's exactly that point. Risk has two sides. Let's look at both sides. Let's not exclude one from the other. I think that's crucial.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter, for your time and all of your expertise connected to wisdom of East with logics of West, and giving us your perspective and showing us that wise leaders, they have to use both parts of their brain, responsible for logic, for imagination, and make those decisions which AI, even though capable of doing, but not necessarily will make our life better. And yeah, this is the crisis that we're going through, and hopefully with all of the insights that we learned from you, that would be an inspiration for us to continue with our research, with our educational programs, hopefully face-to-face. And for those students who are with us, don't forget to apply for our International Week on Sustainability that hopefully will take place in March in Antwerp, where you would have an opportunity to meet face-to-face with Peter and the whole team of professors. So,
I really thank you so much, Ekaterina, and everybody in Moscow. As you know, I'm a big lover of the Russian art, and so I'm more than happy to, and I'm really looking forward to collaborate. Again, that I'm saying I'm looking forward is something that only humans can say. We are the ones who can see in the future and create the future. Computers only can look at the past because of the data pattern is historical data. And that's the beauty of life, that there is a future, that we can imagine that future. And I hope, if that's a takeaway, I hope that you will retain that. And I'm more than happy to answer more questions. And any of the data that I've used in the papers, please feel free to share it. And yes, I'm looking forward to welcome you all in Antwerp very soon, hopefully next year in March. And hopefully one day I may visit you in Moscow.
Okay, so with this, we will say thank you to our great audience for all of your wonderful questions, and we will make sure that the audio recording is available on our YouTube channel. And yes, see you all during our next webinar series, Research Seminars from Graduate School of Business. Thank you for being with us. Have a great evening, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.